Imagine this. You've just finished a hearty lunch, a good mix of protein, maybe some complex carbs. You did everything right. By all standard nutritional logic, you should be fueled up for the next 4 hours. But 20 minutes later, you aren't energized. You're shaking. Your hands have a subtle tremor, your heart is racing, and you feel this sudden, overwhelming wave of exhaustion that makes you want to lie down right there on the kitchen floor. And the weirdest part? You check your blood sugar, and maybe it's a little low, maybe it's normal, but your body is screaming that it's in crisis. For people with adrenal insufficiency, this isn't a rare anomaly. It's a Tuesday. We're looking at an article today titled Cortisol and Blood Sugar, the Invisible Roller Coaster from My Adrenal Life, and it really challenges the standard view of cortisol. We usually hear about cortisol as the villain, right? The stress hormone that gives you belly fat. But this article argues that for people with Addison's disease or secondary adrenal insufficiency, cortisol is actually the fuel gauge. And when it's broken, the engine, your metabolism, goes haywire.
That villain reputation is incredibly pervasive, isn't it? But you're right, it's completely backwards in this context. If you look at the physiology, cortisol is actually one of the body's primary survival mechanisms for energy management. The National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases, the NIDDK, classifies cortisol specifically as a counter-regulatory hormone. That is its day job.
Counter-regulatory to what?
To insulin. Think of your metabolism like a car. Insulin is the brake pedal. It lowers your blood sugar by shoving glucose into cells for storage. It stops the car. Cortisol is the gas pedal. It raises blood sugar when you haven't eaten, when you're sleeping, or when you're stressed. In a healthy body, the driver uses both pedals smoothly to keep a steady speed. But in adrenal insufficiency, the gas pedal is missing. So even a light tap on the brake, just a normal release of insulin after a meal, can screech the car to a halt. You crash.
That explains the roller coaster in the title, but I want to dig into the mechanics of that crash. The article mentions 3 specific problem areas: post-meal drops, overnight instability, and these weird changing patterns over time. Let's start with the post-meal thing because that feels the most counterintuitive. Why would eating food make you feel like you're running out of fuel?
It's a phenomenon often called reactive hypoglycemia, and it is baffling for patients until they understand the chemistry. When you eat, your blood sugar spikes. Your pancreas responds by releasing insulin to bring that sugar down. That's normal. But in a healthy person, as that sugar starts dropping, cortisol gently kicks in to say, okay, that's low enough, let's level off here. It releases stored glucose from the liver, a process called glycogenolysis, to catch the falling blood sugar before it hits the floor.
So cortisol is the safety net.
Exactly. It buffers the fall. But if you have Addison's or secondary adrenal insufficiency, you don't have that buffer. You eat, insulin spikes, blood sugar plummets, and there is no cortisol to catch it. So you go from full to hypoglycemic very, very fast. And the symptoms the article lists, the shakiness, the sweating, the irritability, those are actually not directly caused by the low cortisol. They are caused by what the body uses instead.
Which is what? Adrenaline?
Precisely. The body's smart. It has backups. If cortisol doesn't show up to the party, the brain panics and dumps adrenaline, epinephrine, into the system to force the liver to release sugar. It's a dirty fuel compared to cortisol. It works, but it feels terrible. That's why the article mentions that these symptoms can feel like a panic attack. Physically, the sensation of an adrenaline dump and a panic attack are almost identical. Racing heart, trembling hands, impending sense of doom, but the trigger here is metabolic, not psychological.
That distinction is huge. I can see how easily that would be misdiagnosed as anxiety. You go to a doctor, say, I feel shaky and panicked after lunch, and they hand you an SSRI, not realizing your cortisol coverage is wearing off.
It happens constantly, and the article highlights another layer to this, the timing gap. Most people with adrenal insufficiency take oral hydrocortisone, but oral steroids have a very different curve than natural production. You take a pill, it spikes in your blood within an hour, and then it drops off pretty sharply. If you eat lunch 4 or 5 hours after your morning dose, you might be in a cortisol trough. Your levels are low right when you need them to buffer that insulin response. That mismatch is where the symptoms thrive.
This leads us into the second major issue the article flags: overnight instability. This one seems even more insidious because you're asleep.
You can't exactly monitor your symptoms when you're unconscious. What is happening physiologically at 3 a.m. that makes this so dangerous?
The night is actually the longest fast your body endures. You aren't eating for 8, 10, maybe 12 hours. To keep your brain alive during that time, your body relies entirely on gluconeogenesis, literally creating new sugar. The liver takes proteins and fats and turns them into glucose. Guess which hormone signals the liver to do that?
Cortisol.
Right. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism has shown that cortisol increases gluconeogenesis by stimulating the necessary enzymes in the liver. Without that signal, the liver just sits there. It doesn't produce enough background glucose to keep the baseline steady. So the blood sugar drifts down, down, down. Eventually, it hits a critical low.
And then we get the adrenaline dump again.
Yes, but in your sleep. This is why the article mentions symptoms like night sweats or waking up suddenly feeling unsettled. That is your body jerking you awake with a shot of adrenaline because it thinks you are dying of starvation. It's a survival reflex. You wake up soaked in sweat, heart pounding, maybe confused. Or sometimes you don't wake up fully. You just have terrible sleep quality and wake up the next morning feeling like you ran a marathon. What the article describes as significant weakness upon waking.
It mentions that this happens specifically in the early morning hours. Why then?
Because of the circadian rhythm. In a healthy person, cortisol starts rising around 2 or 3 a.m. and peaks right when you wake up, say 7 or 8 a.m. That surge is what gives you the energy to get out of bed. It's the dawn phenomenon that prepares your metabolism for the day. For someone with AI, unless they are on a very sophisticated pump or modified release medication, their last dose was probably taken at 4 or 5 p.m. the previous day. By 4 a.m., their cortisol is effectively zero. They're running on empty right when their body demands the most fuel.
So they are waking up in a deficit. They're already behind the curve before their feet hit the floor. The article also draws a distinction between the different types of adrenal insufficiency, primary versus secondary. It notes that while cortisol is the main issue for blood sugar, the underlying causes change the risk profile. Can you break that down? Why does the type of AI matter for blood sugar?
This is a critical nuance. Primary adrenal insufficiency, or Addison's disease, means the adrenal glands themselves are destroyed, usually by an autoimmune attack. When the cortex of the gland is destroyed, you lose two major hormones, cortisol and aldosterone. We've been talking about cortisol, but aldosterone regulates sodium and water balance. If you don't have aldosterone, you lose salt. When you lose salt, your blood volume drops and you get dehydrated.
So you have low blood sugar and low blood pressure.
Exactly. It's a double whammy. The article notes that this increases vulnerability during illness. If you have Addison's and you get a stomach flu, you are losing fluid and sugar and you can't retain salt to keep your blood pressure up. That crash into an adrenal crisis happens much faster. Now compare that to secondary adrenal insufficiency, or SAI. This is where the pituitary gland in the brain isn't sending the signal, ACTH, to the adrenals.
So the adrenals work, they just aren't getting the memo.
Right. But, and this is key, the signal for aldosterone comes from the kidneys, not the pituitary. So people with SAI usually still make normal aldosterone. They don't have the salt wasting issue. However, and the article is careful to point this out, they still have the cortisol deficiency. So they still get the hypoglycemia. In fact, some studies suggest hypoglycemia might be more common in secondary AI because the lack of salt-wasting symptoms means they don't get diagnosed as quickly. They might walk around for years just feeling off and having these sugar crashes without knowing why.
There's a section in the article that I found really validating for patients where it talks about the confusion of blood sugar patterns. It says symptoms can feel contradictory, sometimes low, sometimes high. We've talked about the lows. Where do the highs come from? If you don't have the hormone that raises blood sugar, shouldn't you always be low?
That's the paradox of replacement therapy. We are trying to mimic a brilliant, dynamic biological system with a static pill. Sometimes patients have to take higher doses of hydrocortisone to manage a stressful day or an illness. Glucocorticoids, by definition, induce insulin resistance. If you have a moment where your dose is slightly too high for your current activity level, or if you're on a longer-acting steroid like prednisone, you can swing the other way. You block insulin too much, and your blood sugar spikes.
So you're oscillating between too little cortisol, hypoglycemia, and slightly too much cortisol, hyperglycemia. It really is a roller coaster.
And remember, stress plays a huge role here. In a healthy person, stress triggers cortisol. In an AI patient, stress triggers nothing, unless they take extra medication. But stress does still trigger adrenaline. Adrenaline pushes sugar up, so you can have this chaotic interplay where emotional stress spikes your sugar via adrenaline, but then it crashes because there's no cortisol to sustain it. It's a jagged line, not a smooth curve.
The article touches on steroid-induced adrenal insufficiency as well. That's become a huge topic lately, especially with how commonly steroids are prescribed for things like asthma or autoimmune issues. How does the blood sugar picture differ for them?
It's messy. With steroid-induced AI, the body has been exposed to high doses of exogenous steroids for a long time. That often causes baseline insulin resistance, basically type 2 diabetes mechanisms. But then when they try to taper off the steroids, their own adrenal glands are asleep and don't produce cortisol. So they have the underlying insulin resistance pushing sugars high, mixed with the new cortisol deficiency pulling sugars low and causing crashes. Managing glucose in those patients is incredibly difficult because the target is constantly moving.
It sounds like a full-time job. I mean, the practical impact on daily life section of the article really drives this home. It lists things like feeling shaky between meals, energy crashes during stress. These aren't just medical symptoms, they are lifestyle disruptions. If you can't trust your body to get you through a 3 p.m. meeting without the shakes, that changes how you live.
It creates a tremendous amount of vigilance. You have to constantly plan. Did I eat enough protein? Did I take my meds on time? Is this headache dehydration, or is it low blood sugar, or is it low cortisol? The cognitive load is heavy. And what's frustrating is that standard lab tests often miss this. You go to your endocrinologist, they draw your blood at 9 a.m., you took your meds at 7 a.m., your levels look perfect. But that test tells them nothing about what happens to you at 4 p.m. or 3 a.m.
That's the invisible part. The data points available to the doctor don't match the lived experience of the patient. The article emphasizes that noticing these patterns isn't overthinking, it's actually necessary.
Absolutely. Patient-reported patterns are often more valuable than a single cortisol draw. If a patient tells me, every day at 4 p.m. I get shaky and irritable and eating a sugary snack helps for 10 minutes, but then I crash again, that tells me so much about their coverage gap. It tells me their midday dose is wearing off too early. No lab test captures that dynamic as well as the patient's own log.
So if someone listening identifies with this, they have AI, they feel this roller coaster, what is the takeaway? The article ends on a note of gentle empowerment. What does that look like practically?
It means reframing the symptoms. Instead of thinking, I'm anxious or I'm weak, you recognize I am chemically underfueled. It means looking at the timing of your medication and your meals. Are you leaving a 6-hour gap between lunch and dinner without cortisol coverage? That's a setup for a crash. Maybe you need a smaller, more frequent dosing schedule or a snack with protein and fat during that trough.
And ensuring that the people around you understand that when you say, I need to eat, it's not a preference.
Right. It's a medical necessity. The NIDDK guidelines for managing adrenal insufficiency emphasize the importance of preventing hypoglycemia because it can be a precursor to an adrenal crisis. If your sugar drops too low and you get confused, you might forget to take your emergency meds. It's a safety issue. So empowerment is understanding that your blood sugar stability is a proxy for your cortisol stability. If one is off, the other probably is too.
It's a complex dance. I think the most striking thing for me in reading this was just how interconnected these systems are. We like to put things in boxes. This is the sugar box. This is the stress box. But the body doesn't have boxes. It has networks. And cortisol is apparently the network administrator.
That is a perfect way to put it. And when the administrator is out of the office, the network bugs out. The good news is that by understanding the mechanism, understanding that cortisol releases glucose, patients can stop blaming themselves for these symptoms and start managing them with better timing and better communication with their doctors.
Well said. If this episode resonated with you, or if you know someone navigating the invisible ups and downs of adrenal insufficiency, pass this along to them.